get it rolling. Hey everyone, this is Tim Picciott, joined with John Sneisen from World Alternative Media, and today we've got a lot of good things to talk. Well, I don't know if it's good things to talk about, but we do have a lot of interesting things to talk about. Primarily, what's going on with the Federal Reserve and the repo rate. Also, going to get into exactly what the repo rate is, what the discount window is, and all sorts of things that you aren't really hearing in the mainstream media because it is pretty technical stuff. I was in the class that won the national. Today we've got a lot of good things to talk. Well, I don't know if it's good things to talk about, but we do have feedback right now because we are also live on DLive, and I had my DLive screen open, so I do apologize. But that would be a perfect shameless plug to say, hey, you guys can go watch us right now. DLive.tv/the Libertyadvisor, and that was not a pre-planned plug. That was a genuinely live mistake that we just made there. The other thing we're going to talk about is, a lot of hypocrisy going on right now with Ukraine and Joe Biden and impeaching Trump. Just absolutely ridiculous, the things that are going on, especially when you consider, what was actually going on with Ukraine, prior with Joe Biden. So we're going to get into that. We're going to get into the major Bitcoin crash that's been going on right now. So the price of Bitcoin has gone down quite a bit, and we're going to get into some of the reasons for that, and then also talk a little bit about everyone's favorite climate change activist, Greta Thunberg, which, you're not allowed to talk anything bad about her, apparently, because she's 16, but if you're, a 16-year-old guy who's smirking at a Native American that's trying to threaten you, then, it's okay to call him a Nazi and punch him in the face. But we're just talking about all the hypocrisies that are going on, but I think a good place to start would be with the Federal Reserve. So, John, do you want to maybe give the people a little bit of idea of what's going on in terms of, how much new debt is being issued today, and both, in overnight loans and 14-day loans?
Yeah, for sure. So what's happening there over at the Federal Reserve is that they are intervening in what's called the repo market, the repurchase operations market. And so what that means is there's some people out there that claim that they, and we did initially too, I did, where I said that they printed 75 billion in every day.
Fake
But what
news.
what they're doing is that they're putting out there basically almost like a credit line, if I'm not mistaken, right, Tim, to organizations, to corporations, to hedge funds, banks, whoever it is that needs to lend money overnight to survive. And what we've seen so far is, of course, it started, at 75 billion that it was going to be in overnight purchases. So they, made sure that they had that accessible to the institutions that were needing them. And if you look at, like, this is, hold on here, let me go and find the exact, I went a little bit too far. Sorry, guys. So when it really started, it was on the 19th. No, sorry, the 18th.
Well, it was actually, it was like that Sunday night where you had that supposed Saudi, that not the Saudi drone, but the supposed Iranian drone that hit the oil fields, and all of a sudden the price of oil goes up 20%, which was also, happened to be, right before, they're going to have an IPO of the Saudi Aramco. And so sort of my speculation is that some of these traders may have been caught out on the wrong side of that trade. I mean, we see an article here, we will see an article in 2 seconds here, where it shows an ex-Mitsubishi oil trader linked to $320 million loss and denies he hit activities. And actually, I think this guy actually is in hiding right now because he fears for his life, as you probably should be when you lose $320 million. But it's my speculation. Again, I'm saying I don't know this for a fact. It's speculation is that some people may have been caught on the wrong side of this trade, and then that is probably the catalyst for what went on in the repo market. But before John gets back into it, I just want to give a real quick overview of what the repo market is. So the repo market, some banks are going to have too much money every night when they try to settle up. And actually, if I back it up further, what happens is you need to have a certain reserve requirement for all the big banks. I believe it's 10%, and John can correct me if I'm wrong on that. But what's going to happen traditionally is some banks are going to have too much money, some banks aren't going to have enough, and then the banks that have too much will just lend overnight to the banks that don't have enough money, and everything is fine. Well, the other thing that happens with the Federal Reserve Fed funds rate And people don't even know this. The Fed funds rate is only the discount window for when a bank goes to borrow money directly from the Fed. However, banks almost never borrow money directly from the Fed because there's a very bad stigma for doing so. So it's sort of like, if you ride the short bus to school, nobody wants to have the stigma of riding the short bus. And it also, actually, even much more dangerous than that, what is going on is that imagine if you are a bank and another bank won't even lend money to you overnight. I mean, so you're so much of a risk factor that another bank won't even lend money to you overnight. So what happened, the Sunday before last, is that some banks were paying 10% to borrow money overnight. Now that was an annualized rate, so it wasn't like, if you borrowed, $100 that you owed them $110 the next day. Obviously, they're not borrowing $100. Just want to keep it, easy math here because I did go to a public indoctrination center. And when it comes to, the discount rate, banks didn't want to be outed as needing to go to the discount window. So what they did was, so the banks were willing to pay up to 10%. And so the Federal Reserve then said, okay, well, instead of having a transparent market where we actually know, what's going on here, what we're going to do is we're going to basically bail everybody out and let everybody go to the discount window. So that way, the people that are in trouble, we don't know who's in trouble because they got bailed out by everybody going to the discount window. So sorry for jumping in there. It's just sort of an important thing that a lot of people aren't aware of, what the discount window is and what the repo rate is. I mean, it's all boring stuff that usually never comes into play. And the last time it really came into play was 2008. And so, that was a pretty monumentous time. So I just thought it was important to bring that up again because it's something that, usually it's never really mentioned in the news and nobody usually even knows what it even means. But sorry for that.
Yeah, no worries. And it started around the 17th, but actually it started a little bit before that because on like as far back as I have the data, it's the 6th was when it started with $880 million worth of treasuries that was put in overnight. And then it just like increased every single day all the way up to the 17th when it really exploded when you had in the overnight window, we had 53.15 billion on the 17th over to the 18th overnight. And then it increased. Then they had some reverse repurchase, but we're not going to get too much into that because that would be too confusing. But then again, on the Wednesday after, on the 18th to the 19th, they had 75 million made available. And then what happened was that it was oversubscribed. So what that means is that there was 5.05 billion, no, 50, $5.05 billion more that they needed than the Fed was willing to give them.
And as of last night, I've actually just pulled up right now. It's about 12 million.
To slowly, it didn't, go up too heavy, but then the next day, it was 83.8. So you see it increased yet again. So a little bit more now. It's up to about $8.8 billion that they needed more than what the Fed initially had given to them. And then the next day after that, the 20th to over, like this was over the weekend, they were at $550 million short. And then if you go to, let's see, the 23rd, so Monday to Tuesday this week, it was undersubscribed to the of course the 75 billion that the Fed made available. It was 65.75. Then again, it started to ramp up a bit because what they hadn't done before is that they only did the overnight repo rates to lend to the institutions. But what they suddenly started to do after, and this is after a while, so now you're seeing that they need 65.75. Then again, it started lines that they need to actually bail out as well. And initially it was going to do 30, but then it got $62 billion that they needed, and that was both in mortgage-backed securities and treasuries and also some agency. And then the 24th to 25th, still the overnight was oversubscribed. It was at $5 billion over. And then on Wednesday, so yesterday till today, it was 91.9 versus the 75 that they made available. So now it was oversubscribed again by quite a lot more. And then you look at of course, they tried to have the 14-day term that they made available. It was initially 30. It we got oversubscribed with 60, but then they put out 60, but now we oversubscribed them with 72.75. And then you look at the last from today till tomorrow, and we'll see what comes out. Of course, tomorrow we don't know yet. But for today till tomorrow, it's 50.1 million, no billion dollars that have been subscribed and accepted by the Federal Reserve as a.
And then let's also
bill.
just juxtapose this off of what initially we were going to be seeing, and what initially was supposed to be going on is last year right around this time, it was October, is when the Federal Reserve said that they were going to have their peak quantitative tightening, which was the exact opposite of this, where they're going to be selling $50 billion a month off their balance sheet. And I probably have 20 videos going back, some of them going back 2 years in advance, saying, pinpointing this moment being last October. And you guys can go to my own YouTube page. It's either the Libertyadvisor, and I think there's only 170 subscribers on there. So would appreciate anyone watching that. But I have a Tim Picciott was right video that is sort of, spoofing Peter Schiff, not spoofing him, but showing, it's, I guess, it's somewhat honoring him. But anyways, with that video, there was times where I was saying, I'm like, how are we going to be able to sell $50 billion a month off our treasury, off the Federal Reserve balance sheet? Who's going to buy that? Because traditionally, the largest buyer of the Federal Reserve's of the debt is the Federal Reserve, and so now the largest buyer is going to be the largest seller. There's no way that's going to happen. And then who's the second largest? It's usually either China or Japan, depending on the month. And we're in a trade war with China, so that's not going to happen. And then who's third? Oh, it's Japan, and they're like basically the most indebted first world country in the world. And so, and it wasn't only about the 50 billion, it's also about the other 100 billion that we need in order to finance the deficit. So if the deficit is roughly 1.2 trillion, that's $100 billion a month, which is funny because if you add that 100 plus the other 50 that we're selling, that would be 150 billion. And so now not only are they not able to sell 150 billion, now over the course of the past 2 weeks, they have to inject 160 billion because it's 100 billion in the overnight market, and then it's $60 billion in the 14-day market. So they went from a swing of saying, yeah, we're going to be able to sell 150 billion. And I'm like, and I have so many videos where I'm like, that is fake news. No way that can happen. And everyone's like, shut up. You're just a stupid libtard who doesn't believe in Trump, and which has nothing to do with, this case. And I'm, obviously not a liberal, but then, actually I'm probably more of a classical liberal because, the names don't mean anything. And so I knew that couldn't happen. And so we go from having to sell $150 billion a month to now we need to inject $160 billion a day. And obviously, as John pointed out, that those injections are, it's sort of like if I give you $10 borrowed overnight, and then I give you $10 and a penny the next morning, and I'm like, hey John, I need to borrow money again, and then I borrow another $10. And so it's not.
Yeah, it's like a credit line almost.
Yeah, so it's not quite as bad as what people have made it out. I mean, I don't want to poo-poo this because it is bad. And I thought that the biggest catalyst would be once the Federal Reserve loses control of the rates, and that's what they're doing right now. They're losing control of the rates, and everyone is sleeping. No one cares at Goldman Sachs. Nobody cares at the maybe they care at the Federal Reserve, but nobody cares, and nobody it's like, oh hey, we got football on again, so let's just be distracted by that. No one cares about Jeffrey Epstein and all the stuff going on over there because now we've got football. It's a new day in America, and and then one thing, maybe I don't know if, how much more you wanted to add to the Federal Reserve, but we did have some treats, not some treats, it might be a treat, but some tweets from the Trumpster where
it kind of is a treat. It's pretty.
These tweets are
humorous.
treats. Yeah, I think you're right. But he goes on and says, and we're talking about the impeachment, and I will say that this impeachment is such crap that the Clinton playbook is to always accuse your enemies of doing the exact same things you're doing. And then first they want to say he's a Russian agent, and now he's now he's a Ukrainian agent, even though the Russians hate Ukraine, and this whole Ukraine fiasco is basically over. You had Victoria Nuland at the State Department who was pushing to have Ukraine get into NATO and the EU so that way they could have military bases right up against Russia. And then all this deep state stuff is going on, and essentially that plan got shelved. And sorry, what was that, John?
Yeah, and also we got to remember, I think her husband was connected or actually worked for Monsanto as well, which Monsanto, of course, haven't been allowed in Ukraine because of their terrible pesticide Roundup. So maybe that has a tiny little bit as well, because Ukraine is the breadbasket of Europe, of course. And with even their flag shows it, because it's the blue is the sky and the yellow is the wheat,
And
that
let's
they
not
produce.
forget that Monsanto was recently bought out by Bayer, and Bayer, were the ones behind. Well, I don't know. It's actually Monsanto was behind Agent Orange, and so that was Vietnam. But then Bayer was behind. They were originally, I believe, their company was called IG Farben back in the during the days of World War I and World War II, and they were the ones who made the gas to kill the Jews. And so, I mean, what a great and now like they're basically in control of all the food. On one hand, Monsanto, who is
It's
Agent
almost
Orange,
like fitting, yeah.
yeah, one of the largest, chemical and poison manufacturers of the world with their glyphosate. And then on the other hand is Bayer, who made the gas to kill the Jews. And now they've merged.
And
What a
and the
marriage made in heaven.
pharmaceuticals.
Yeah, marriage made in heaven over there. And then now it's like, oh, what can go wrong with having, two companies that have been, at the forefront of all this death and destruction now being in control of the entire, and we're getting off the rails because I don't think this is what we were initially planning on talking about, food and all this other stuff and Nazis. But anyways, going back to Donald Trump, he says, do you think it was luck? And let me try to pull up this quote right here. Do you think it was luck that got us the best stock market and economy in our history? It wasn't. And this is where he basically sort of pisses me off, because what it was? It was that you gave everybody this optimism that everything had been solved and that's a new day in America, when all you really did was give a big tax cut to the major companies that then led them to repatriate their money back over here, which then which then led them to buy back their own shares, which then gave temporary prosperity and the illusion that things were going great. And then we had to then lower the interest rates back. And it's the lowering of the interest rates that's keeping a bubble alive. But ultimately, it's unsustainable. And if you don't tackle dealing with the Federal Reserve, which what'd you do? You put Jerome Powell in there, who's an absolute globalist. And I called it out the day you put him in there. Whereas all the other Trump people are like, oh, you're just a Trump tard, or just a, some libtard because you don't like Donald Trump. And he knows more about you than the Federal Reserve. Well, guess what? He does not know more about the Federal Reserve than me. And if he would have listened to me instead of these Goldman Sachs guys surrounding him like what's his name Mnuchin, then I would never. Even he had one of the guys that was this close to getting in there. I believe the guy's name was James Allison, the former M&T Bank CEO. This guy was like a end the Feder, like hated big banks, even though he ran a big bank. I mean, to me, he would have, and there shouldn't even be a Fed, but if you're going to pick somebody, that would be the guy to pick, not, Jerome Powell, who is basically Janet Yellen's clone. And then he was in there bitching about, family show here. He's in there complaining about, what was it? He was complaining about, the fact that Janet Yellen is keeping low interest rates low and doing political things to benefit Hillary Clinton, and then, calling her a bonehead. And then Jerome Powell then actually does raise rates, and then he's pissed off about that. So, I mean, he wants to have his cake and eat it both ways, but all he wants to do is sustain a bubble. He doesn't want to actually fix the real problem. And no, he's not going to go and nationalize the Fed, and no, not just sit around and trust a plan because he's going to do some great thing to nationalize it. And everyone who's saying that, you guys are literally the ones who are causing this problem. My initials are trust the plan, and I don't trust the plan. And it's just crazy, to think. But but the reason we're talking about this has to do with the, what is all this impeachment talk, which I think is such crap. I mean, they want to impeach him basically because he asked the new Ukrainian president something along the lines of, hey, can you go look into what Hunter Biden was doing over there? And I don't know, Hunter Biden does a lot of weird things. I mean, some of you might not realize that Hunter Biden, when he's not, getting kicked out of the Navy for doing cocaine, and when he's not, the person that he had an affair with was actually his deceased brother's widow that he cheated on his wife with. So, I mean, you guys can go look that up. I mean, that almost sounds too crazy to even believe. But that's not my problem with him. The problem with him is that you have literally Joe Biden, who was on a Council on Foreign Relations panel where, it says CFR behind him. And if anyone that knows anything about the CFR, they're sort of like the shadow government that controls a lot of the news that goes on in America. And this actually kind of gets into a little bit of an interesting story if we back things up a little bit, because this is also ties in with the Federal Reserve, the founding of the Council on Foreign Relations. Because if you back things up way back, what went on is that you had the Royal Institute of Affairs that was started from the will of Cecil Rhodes. Cecil Rhodes was a frontman for the Rothschild family. He owned the De Beers diamond mines. His entire will left his money to creating a one world Anglo-American New World Order. The secret roundtable group that was founded off of that will was the Royal Institute of Affairs in the Chatham House, London. And then The American counterpart was called the Council on Foreign Relations, the CFR. And so all this stuff is tied together. These are also the guys pushing climate change because they own the carbon exchanges that you then pay into them. And this is like super, super cliff notes of all this stuff. So here you have Joe
And also,
Biden.
also CFR members who created like G30 and a whole bunch of wide array of other groups that, members of the CFR has created
And
again,
good people like Hillary Clinton and Dick Cheney and Timothy Geithner, who are all former directors of those. And I'm sort of saying good people because I started trolling the Bill Weld, the former Libertarian candidate, who said that she was a person of great character. But yeah, this whole Ukrainian deal is Hunter Biden, again, when he wasn't screwing his deceased brother's widow and when he wasn't doing cocaine in the Navy, was going to get paid $50,000 a month to be a natural gas consultant, even though the dude has no idea about anything with natural gas. Basically, it was a political payoff to the Bidens to have his dip what son in there, and with Hunter Biden, Joe Biden was literally on TV on this Council on Foreign Relations thing where he said, and that's when I said, you're not getting your $1 billion unless you get this prosecutor off of this company. Well, this company was the one that was the company that paid Hunter Biden like millions of dollars to basically as a payoff for his father to allow the State Department to allow this group to go through. And now you've got Trump, who's like, and this is all knowledge that I knew this years ago. A lot of you guys probably knew this years ago. John knew it. Josh knew it. Everybody freaking knows this. And then Trump is just like, hey, congratulations on your great victory. You're going to drain the swamp. I'm draining the swamp. We're all swamp draining. Can you look into Hunter Biden for me? And now the left is like, that's the worst thing that's ever happened. And well, what'd he do? He's asked to look into what Joe Biden was doing. When meanwhile, there's been this gigantic witch hunt and everything Trump was doing with Russia when he wasn't even doing anything. So it's just the complete hypocrisy of this. And I'm not advocating one way or another. I hate both the political parties. I even hate the Libertarian Party, equal opportunity hater all the way around. But it's just so crazy how all this stuff that nobody cares about really any of this stuff. So I don't know if you've got anything else to add onto this or if you want to move into another topic.
Well, I thought I'm just going to come up with an analogy that I was thinking about draining the swamp. They basically drained the swamp, a little part of it, but then the problem is they flooded the swamp in other areas. So it's, trying to like drain the swamp or whatever and get rid of, corruption in the political system. It's like a big joke because there's no way like removing corruption from a corrupt system in itself. It's like trying to cure cancer with cancer or something like that. It's obviously it's not going to work because the whole system is toxic and we are sitting on the side of it. Like I voted. People are posting here in Canada too. During the provincial, now soon the federal election here, that I made my part to make Canada a democracy. Meanwhile, it's a totalitarian dictatorship over here in Canada as well. You got you had the NDAA in the United States, but here you had C-51 and a whole bunch of other bills that are trying to steal the last little freedoms that we have left as individuals. And of course, these guys, they don't allow the individuals. They actually just want the group and the common to actually pray and the democracy, the group of individuals to say what the other group should be thinking. And that is a flawed philosophy. Of course, this has failed so many times throughout history. We had several states, and I think the United States is looking so much like the Roman Empire at the end of it. After the debasing the currency, now they're struggling with the completely corrupted monetary system at the end of it. And then of course they implemented, you're talking about people seeing the news, shows or sports on TV. Well, that's the breads and circuses that we have today. These big coliseums that we've built, massive, that have been taxpayer funded in the United States, of course, to keep the crowd busy, because in the little amount of time that we have, because we got to work our asses up because of the collapse of the value of the dollar, you have to be out there like on that little bit amount of time. They don't want you to go and do your research and look up things, so they try to get you involved in cheering for sports teams and doing all this entertainment to keep you from actually realizing the Ponzi scheme that they've been running for since 1913. when they started the Federal Reserve System, Tim.
Yes, yeah, and it is a gigantic. Sorry, I muted myself so that way I couldn't interrupt you. But
Yeah.
here I am. But yeah, it's just absolutely, it is a gigantic Ponzi scheme that's going on. And yeah, I see somebody in the comments like, "Hey, he looks like he's former military." You know what? I had the guy cut my hair way too tight. Yeah, now I look like a cop or military. So deal with it. Sorry.
Hey, I'm actually former military, and let me tell you how much I dislike it. Up there, up in the Norwegian-Russian border, of course, because yeah, John must have some connections up there. Being on the Norwegian-Russian border, you must be working for those Russians. Of course, we work for the Americans, and we did intelligence spying on the Russians up there. And of course, what was even more interesting is that the guy that I used to give like NATO secret naval documents, he was caught in Russia with Russian naval secret documents. So he probably, maybe it was I guess he ran out of money for his pension. His name is Frode Berg. You could look it up. He sits in prison and probably rot in Russian prison because of that he was caught with these documents. But he probably gave the documents that I used to give. Maybe he gave them to the Russians, so he was double agent. But then the Russians were like, screw you. We got what we wanted, but we're gonna make a fool out of you and feed you to the wolves, of course. And it's really funny how this whole collusion of Russia. The Russia, like, people are also very pro-Russia. What you got to understand is also that Putin is a fascist dictator. He lets you live in a kind of a free market economy until you speak up against him. Then he'll shut you down. I have a friend of mine that I met at the Red Pill Expo, a young Russian guy, and he actually told me how Putin shut down his dad's company in Russia. So, like, any of these, like, big government, the big political systems, like, they live and die with the value of their fiat currencies, Tim. And that's what we're seeing currently as both the United States, Russia, China, everybody's struggling with the value of their fiat currencies. And, at the end of it, usually they go to war to, as a lot to try to save the whole system by printing, vast amounts of debt. But I don't think that's going to save them this time. All this printing of money, even through war, they want to go in Iran, want to go and bomb people over there. Of course, Iran is still a totalitarian government. There's no good governments out there. Like, if you could point out one good government out there that are doing fantastic things, other than Liberland, of course, with Jedlichka, I dare you to come and give me an example of any good countries. I lived in Norway, and I definitely see tons of corruption in government, tons of problems with massive government there. People are fed up with it. So yeah, give me one example, and let's try to discuss it, because I don't see any good coming out of any governments anywhere in the world. And of course, with this overprinting of currency, now we're seeing the bailout of the overnights, which is basically the start of a big financial crisis. On top of that, having struggles around in Europe and everywhere else with the growth there, because that's all they need. They need growth in order to sustain the system. But when growth is not happening, they can't print more debt to feed the interest that doesn't exist. So it's like an ever increasing Ponzi scheme. You need that debt to feed off, to pay off the ever increasing interest, but then the interest will never stop to increase and never. So it's like an ever winning game. You always, if you paid out all the debt in the world, you would still owe interest on it. So it's a clear Ponzi scheme, Tim. And I think we're going to talk a little bit about what's happening in Europe, because of course Europe is also on the precipice. They've been kind of in trouble since after, about 2011, they really started to see trouble. And then it's been like a slow drain as, the ECB has been bailing out corporation and a whole bunch of other, buying bonds and so on in the European Union. So if you can elaborate a little bit more on that, and maybe pull up an article or something talking about what's happening or some data, what's happening in Germany and especially in the Eurozone.
Yeah, thank you for that. And one thing that was important that before I touch on this is that you had talked about saving the system. You can't save the system. You can only delay the day of reckoning. So if I were to go in there as president and people are always thinking, oh, this guy must just hate the president. Well, guess what? Right here is a hat signed "Make America Great Again" hat by Donald Trump that I spent $250 on before the election. So how many of you guys spent $250 who were hating on me? spent $250 on a signed hat. How many of you guys spent $3,000 on targeted
For
Facebook
Timmy,
ads?
you were brainwashed.
Yeah, I spent $3,000 on targeted ads into battleground states where I reached millions and millions of people to help Donald Trump. So I don't want to hear. And the very first podcast I ever made says, if he does 1,000 things that are great, or let's say he wants to accomplish 1,000 things, well, if he doesn't end up, basically taking care of the Federal Reserve, I don't care what the other 999 are. So he made a gigantic mistake by going in there, taking credit for everything, and then instead of philosophically saying there shouldn't be a Federal Reserve, or philosophically saying that pointing out how the whole thing's a fraud like Dr. Ron Paul would do, he went in there and said, hey, I want to have low rates too, and I'm a low rate guy, and can I get this too? And basically, like Tulsi Gabbard called him Saudi's biatch, and I would call him right now, he's just doing whatever he can do to get elected, because he knows the average person is not smart enough to realize what's going on with this. And so it doesn't do me any favors that you kick the can down the road for another 4 years, or maybe another 8 years, and then it's not going to matter, because then what's going to happen? Is the government going to be bigger when you're out of there? Yes. Is the deficit going to be bigger? Yeah, it's already exploded. So I think if anything, all the Republicans who don't call him out, you guys are the ones to blame, not me. You guys should be thanking having people like me who was directly convincing libertarians to vote for Trump. That's all I was doing. I was going on Facebook as a libertarian advisor at the time, just trying to convince people to vote for Trump. I was on Right Side Broadcasting for like 5 or 6 minutes, just been to 10 hours in line at one of the Trump rallies. My wife got me at one point I was having articles talking about how the polls are rigged. So, I had a fake news list go viral 2.5 months before the president used that. So I love when people are like, this guy is Trump derangement syndrome. Well, screw everyone that says this, because you know what? You guys don't have the signed hat. I thought he was going to get assassinated, and then I thought it'd be worth a lot of money afterwards. But so I'm not disappointed that didn't happen. I'm just sort of shocked that the deep state didn't take him out. But going back to Germany over here, so Germany was known for being, essentially, when everyone was talking about how great the euro was, it was because of that you had Germany. Well, Germany's got terrible demographics. Their country's very old. That's why Hitler's daughter, Angela Merkel, was encouraging all the, Al-Qaeda members and nice Muslims to go over there, because the whole game plan was to sort of overrun their system. Cloud and Piven, you overwhelm the system, the welfare system, you collapse everything, you get to remake it in your own image. And what's going on even right now in Germany, as you guys see, the dark red line is Germany, and you see the beginning of 2018 that there's just been a roller coaster ride all the way down. It's a downhill slog, and even much more defined than the entire Euro area as a whole. And so Europe, and particularly Germany, was being always held up as being the ones that keep everything together. And now we're at the point where Germany is basically leading the way down. And a lot of this has to do with the demographic information. We know, at least in America, that the average American spends the most amount of money in their lifetime at age 46. That's why, the baby boom started in 1946. You add 46 years to that. You've got 1992. That's when Bill Clinton came into office. And then now the baby boomers, the oldest ones in America, are just turning, 73 right now. So they're actively going to have to start pulling from pensions, IRAs, 401ks, all that sort of stuff. And so the next time there is a financial crisis, they can't really ever afford to have things go down, because so many people will be pulling money from these pensions that they're going to basically blow up. And I think that will be the final catalyst, that people will finally realize that, there's no more putting Humpty Dumpty back together
there's no
again.
Buyers. Yeah,
that's going to happen no matter what. That's going to happen regardless of whether rates go up or whether rates go down. They're damned if they do, damned if they don't. If rates end up staying low, then the pensions end up collapsing because there's not enough interest rates to pay for the bonds that they have. If rates go up, then they're also screwed, because they're holding on to, probably half their portfolios into bonds. And if for every 1% the rate goes up, let's say you have a 10-year bond, the underlying principal goes down by 10%. And so if you don't have, 10 years to ride things out and to get your money back, and then you've got to start pulling from principal, and the bonds are paying nothing to begin with, or in many cases overseas they're paying below nothing, that it's just going to be an absolute train wreck of a situation. So, I am giving out free consultations, briefly right now. That probably will be going away, as we're bringing on more people in next year. But if you guys want to check out the Libertyadvisor.com, there's places where you guys can schedule me there for 15 minutes. Check out what you're doing. We also have self-directed IRAs where you can get gold and crypto into your IRAs, and I don't know if this is a good spot to maybe talk about crypto, because we were talking about the breadbasket. We're talking about Ukraine and Russia. Well, one place that's sort of near there, and maybe John, you have to help me pronounce this, is Kyrgyzstan. How do you pronounce?
No, it's in English. It's Kyrgyzstan and Kyrgyzstan. I believe it's more like the actual name of it. Yeah.
Okay, so the country that's not Kazakhstan, that starts with a K, cut off power to 45 crypto miners for overconsumption. And what they did was, it looked like there was it was an astronomical number here. I don't think this one says it. There maybe is the other article that I was
No,
looking at.
I actually give you the number. Like, they cut the hashing rate by 31.63%, and then now it's back up to only a 6% loss in hashing rate right now.
Okay, yeah, you know what? It was the megawatts of electricity is what I was looking for. So it was 136 megawatts of electricity, which was actually more than 3 entire regions of Kyrgyzstan.
Yeah.
And so that was a major impetus. You also had I think, actually, believe it or not, it was Kazakhstan, I think, also did the same thing. So every country that begins with a K and ends in Stan over there didn't really like themselves some Bitcoin. So yeah, you saw the hash rate go from 88.3 petahash all the way down to like 53, 57, which isn't even that far down. I mean, I remember it was a gigantic deal when they went over 10 for the first time, and I think that was
yeah,
2017.
Tim, just like, I'm just looking at the data right now, and last time it was this low was at let's see here. Let's go to the lowest point. Yeah, you had 63.78 terahashes, but that was on August 17th this year. So it wasn't that was a massive drastic drop. Yeah, it was a little bit of drastic drop, 31% down from the top, but it's back upping pretty close, and it's on an upward trend again. So yeah, it happened, but then you can see how actually Bitcoin seemed to have sustained that, and it's still working. Nothing is really way out of whack with the system. So yeah, no, I think it's still like, yeah, you could have a government coming in and simultaneously cut all the energy to these plants, to the mining farms. But again, there's still a ton of others that are mining this stuff, and they seem to be back again, most of them. I don't know, Tim. It's like back up at 92. What is it right now? It's at 92.209 from the peak there. Well, it wasn't actually even the peak. It went from 98 down to 67, but then now it's back up at 92.8 again. So yeah, it's actually 92.8 is above what it was as far back as on the 19th. So just a week ago. So there you see, like, it was a drastic drop. There's been some bigger drops before that we've seen that have been like similar, and they happen all the time. If you go and look at the hashing rate of Bitcoin, you'll see that this is not the first one. It was a little bit bigger than the other ones, a tiny little bit bigger than the other bigger ones, but still it was just again a bleep, and it's back up again, way above where it was just a week ago.
Yeah, no, it's for me. I mean, long term, I'm not really too concerned about what's going on. I've got some people who got in early, who were trying to do different trust strategies for. So for them, I'm sort of hoping that it goes back up over 10. But for other people who are looking to get into crypto IRAs, that's a better thing to do when the price is low. And I know people are saying, hey, half of these people who are up there, referring to me, are paid trolls or paid commercial. Believe it or not, the YouTube doesn't really pay the bills doing things, so, and we do, want to point out that Josh is over in Turkey right now, and, he's going to be doing some awesome reports from Göbekli Tepe, and, even doing that stuff, he was selling Bitcoin to fund himself to go over there. He wasn't, it's not from getting paid, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year from YouTube, as YouTube, dramatically slashed, basically any revenue. And so the only way, you guys will be able to see, people up here speaking the actual real truth is by supporting independent media. And one of them is to, buy John's books. We've got that now at the bottom of the screen, where John has a couple of different books on Amazon. Another way is to, donate money to Josh Sigurdsson, and another one is becoming a client of mine, where I only need, if 0.01% of people became a client, then that would be enough to basically fund everything. So, it's just different ways. We're giving you different options, but if we don't promote ourselves, then who is? And the best time to take action is before a financial crisis, not after a financial crisis, especially if you've got some good ideas on what you think you're going to do. So I think that's probably where we want to wrap things up. And, we're going to take some questions now. So that's one of the benefits of being on the live stream, is that we can do some questions. So let me pull up some questions over here on the right. And I hope too. So another thing we did was, maybe let's just cut it first, and then we'll go to questions. So this is Tim Picciott with John Sneisen, or Be the Truth, or sorry,
Find the truth.
Find the truth. Be the change.
Be the change.
All right, one of these days I'll get that right. I keep screwing that up. But one thing, I switched over broadcasting software, so I was using something called Wirecast, and now I switched over to XSplit. I've never used it before today, so I was hoping that I could get some of the kinks out of the way, because it's super easy if you just want to stream to YouTube. But if you want to get graphics underneath, and if you want to go out to a bunch of different places at once and bring in a guest, that's where things get tricky. So my full-time job is not being a YouTube master. So I do appreciate people for kind of bearing with us, especially some of the last couple we had over there. So let me go in here. And let's see, you got people. Hi, Rob Lowry. Hi from Montana. Hi. You got people commenting on John's hat. People commenting about Digibyte. I don't really know a ton about Digibyte. I think they've got like one of the longest chains. I'm not.
And it's one of the faster like proof of work chains out there as well.
Yeah, I was trying to get in touch with Jared, the guy that
actually, one of the guys, we have him on there all the time. Stephen Kendall is one of our big. He's a huge Digibyte guy over in England.
Yeah, and then let's see. You heard the Fed is working with Globalist. LOL. Wow, genius insights. I was saying how Jerome Powell was a globalist the day that he picked him, and that he shouldn't have done it because it was the dumbest move Trump could have possibly made. And I think I've been vindicated 1,000 times over on that. So the genius that you guys are defending, Donald Trump, is the one that put Jerome Powell in there, not me. Just want to say that. Okay, another thing we had over here was, we didn't talk about that Greta Thunberg. So we all know everyone's favorite climate change activist, the little 16-year-old girl. I looked into her for just a tiny, tiny bit. And what you see basically is not shocking at all. So, you got her mother, who's a somewhat famous opera singer. So if you're an opera singer, you can, captivate a room. You know how to, you could probably cry on demand. You're able to, get a lot of emotion that goes out through here. And I'm trying to see where her husband is, because the other day I just linked it right over here on the right. But I can't find it right now. But her husband is a writer, director, actor. And then his father is a famous director and actor over there. Okay, here we go.
Malena Erdman.
Then we've got Svante Thunberg is... Yeah,
Svante Thunberg. That's the Swedish.
Okay. And that's good that we've got you here, because I over here as the ignorant American just butchering everything. And actually, look, they have changed. This has been changed. Actually, no, it's I don't know. Yeah, Swedish author, arts manager, and producer, and actor, having written different things, blah 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 blah. And then I did see also where his father was a famous director, because I looked at her and I'm like, oh my god, like she just does such a good job of getting the emotion out and being able to just captivate a room. Like, this was obviously written, scripted, rehearsed. And like, oh yeah, spend 5 seconds on Google and find out that both her parents are actors. And the whole thing is all a big ruse to get everyone to pay a global carbon exchange. And the trillionaires that are even above, the Bezos of the world, they own the exchanges, not you. And it has nothing to do with actual climate change, because the best
look at Blood and Gore. That's actually not a hedge joke. Name. That's actually the hedge fund that actually has a carbon exchange, which is hilarious. Like, they actually sell these. Al Gore and his, I forgot the name of his other guy, Blood is his last name, but blood and gore is it's almost hilarious that
it was like Frank
yeah.
it was like Frank blood or something, or blood and gore. I don't know.
Yeah.
Let me go look at blood and gore. I'm typing this in the
Yeah, but what's interesting is though that there's like he's making a ton of money on these carbon credits getting sold. He's like the banker, siphoning off the little bit of fees here and there for all the carbon credits getting traded on the platform, and it's just laughable. With
What's
these
funny
guys.
you say this because as soon as you said that, the first article that came up with blood and gore making a killing on anti-carbon investment hype. Yeah, and they own the carbon exchanges. So
yeah,
and there actually was a clip. Maybe I think our friend Kingsley Edwards sent it to me the other day, so I can probably try to see if I can find it. I think he sent it to me on Signal. And it was a clip of that Greta Thunberg, and she says something like, if we could just make the banks healthy, and then like she almost stops, but it's let me see if I can go try to pull that clip up. And I do have to get going soon because I know my wife's coming home soon, but let me just type in Greta Thunberg banks. I mean, I don't know, I'm sure they probably have already killed. Yeah, it's like, if we can save the banks, if we can save so I'm trying to pull this up. It was, yeah, if we can save the banks, then we can save the world. That was the quote. But this is a 9-minute video, and I need to find like the 30-second video for this. Let me record. Okay, where is Kingsley? Okay, here it goes. Twitter. Copy link. Let's put it over here in the search engine. I couldn't even believe this. I'm like, it's like everything. It's like everything we talk about. Okay, all right. Let me get the volume up on this. Okay, let me start it from the beginning. Get the screen up there. Let me see if we can expand this a little bit. Thank you guys for bearing with me. And here we go.
The money is there. If we can save the banks, then we can save the world. The money is there. If we can save the banks, then we can save the world.
Yeah, if we can save the banks, then we can save the world. Now, I don't know if it's almost like, I don't know if that was
it's the banks that have done this to us. Oh my God.
She's just like, oh crap. She's like, oh man, I'm gonna get Hillary. I'm gonna get suicide.
Is this serious? Like, I can't believe that I just heard that. That's unbelievable. That these banks. If you want to talk about poisoning the planet, Greta. Think about all those banksters that have been funding, Monsanto and other corporations that have completely destroyed, the environment at some points, right? Like, this is laughable. Like, are you're supposed to be like an environmentalist? Like, you only care about apparently about global warming. You don't care about the environment very much because the banks have been funding wars, bombing, emitting CO2 all across the world. Like, this is laughable. Like, come on, I know that she's a little kid and that kind of, like, maybe that's, she doesn't understand it too well, unfortunately. But again, that's insane statement to say that, if we save the banks, we save the world.
Anyone wants to answer?
Climate change is over.
Well, there's another good one too, where I don't know who's like worse without a teleprompter, whether it's her or Barack Drone Bomber. But let me go to this clip now, and I'll fast forward through some of it. But here she is, not with a teleprompter, not with a rehearsed UN script.
Please tell us what kind of message, what you are doing here today. What kind of message would you send by doing this to world leaders? And also, can I ask you, do you?
Let's just fast forward this.
I think. I'm sorry. What was the first question?
Wait, I don't think I just.
What's the message you would like to send to world leaders by doing
Save
what
the
you are
banks.
doing?
I think what we want to send is the message we want to send is to say that we have had enough. And anyone else wants to answer that question? I can't see it.
Yeah, so not so slick over there. And again, she is 16, but there's hypocrisy.
höll en pressträff med andra klimataktivister efter talet i FN. Okay, so the Swedes, the Swedes are very well known for pushing, of course, climate change. And actually, let me tell something about what just happened in the local elections in Norway. The Green Party of Norway actually got 15% of the seats in the government in Oslo, the major capital. So that should scare a little bit of people because they want to ban all cars in Norway.
Yeah, we got people saying, why is a man asking what a little girl's opinion is about how we should run things? That's decompiler, and exactly. You know what? I bought into all this crap when I was 15 years old too. I grew up in in New York, a very liberal place. Went to a liberal arts indoctrination center, and where I took classes on global warming, and then and they only teach you one side of the story. I remember thinking one of my uncles was like an absolute idiot because he was saying that global warming wasn't real and it's propaganda, and they literally make it think that when you're in eighth grade that and I don't really blame her because it's been propagandized, but you don't know the other side of the story. And so what gets me is let me give you like a best like Bernie Sanders impression, like the millionaires, the billionaires. Well, guess what? The billionaires are the ones that own the media, and if the media are pushing getting a global climate, you don't think the richest people in the world aren't in control of the media? I mean, it's not really that too far of a leap to really make that. To make that assertion. And so the richest people in the world are the ones that own the media, who are the ones that own the carbon exchanges, and they're pushing something where you will literally pay them a tax. That tax will then fund basically having like a worldwide government. And so it's sort of like how the EU, when that was started, which actually came out of the 1956 Bilderberg meeting, they never thought that they were signing on to having an actual EU. They thought they were eventually signing on to having a common currency. Well, and that's why, Meredith and Rothschild said, I care not who makes the law, I care who controls the money, and I control the money. And so in this way, this is going to be the basis to have a worldwide tax, which then is the basis to have a worldwide, new world order, as, you've had just about every president, probably except for Trump, mention of, certainly since I know both of us have been alive. And the whole thing is just, absolute crap propaganda.
Tim, come on, just give the UN $2.7 trillion a year, and then they're going to fix things. That's what they told us. So I think it's about time we print some money and save our world from utter, meltdown. Like the whole crust of the earth would just melt because it's going to be too hot here.
Yeah, and I love how they say, like, you guys are denying climate change. Like, wait a minute, you guys have changed the goalposts so many times. Like, what happened to global warming? Like, because, you realize that there's all this data where they were, like, inferencing data, and there's raw data. If you look at the raw data, there's actually some cooling, or it's the same.
Yeah,
if you look at the inference data.
Yeah, and Tim, sorry to interrupt you there, but there have also been, severe things big things that they've forgotten to, put into the measurements, like the thing that I can't see right now, but the sun, the big red ball that actually keeps us all alive on this planet. If the sun was gone, we would all be dead. We couldn't live here because we need that vitamin D. Vitamin D, not having that, it's they actually just recently that vitamin D is more like cures influenza and other flus better than the vaccines. So it's just laughable, like what they've done. And I had my dad over here for a little while ago, and what was interesting is my dad was telling me how he actually had a business acquaintance that he had over in Kongsvinger in Norway, and what he told him actually was that it was massive fraud, the UN and the IPCC climate panel. And who he had heard it from? It was his wife from Norway that was sitting on the IPCC climate panel and calling it that it was like utter bullshit, the numbers that they came out with to, fairmonger. That's what his wife said. But of course, I don't have the source, so I can't, for certain say that what it was. But that's at least what my dad was told by the guy that his wife was working for the IPCC. So I don't know, maybe it's just a bunch of guys that really cares about the environment and are trying to save us. Or maybe they are, using fair tactics in order to, tax us more and make us more enslaved. Because you got to remember the United Nations was started, and this whole like Agenda 2030, 21, Agenda 2030 was started actually by Maurice Strong was one of them, together with Gro Harlem Brundtland from Norway, the former head of and Prime Minister of Norway. In the Labour Party of Norway. But Maurice Strong, he was actually funded by Rockefeller at the start of it to create this whole green movement. And at the time, Maurice Strong was working in the oil fields. Now, of course, Maurice Strong, the last years that he lived, he actually had taken money off. I forgot what it was at the United Nations, and he was wanted for stealing money from the United Nations, and he lived his last days in China, of all places. which is kind of fitting, with his beliefs.
Then you get into like the Huxleys, like Julian and Aldous
Yeah.
Huxleys, and the roles
Yeah,
they
but
played,
again,
and the eugenics societies, and
yeah, exactly. But I want to just get back to like how they're finally starting to calculate in the sun now at the IPCC. I heard. I recently watched a YouTube
John, are you some sort of
special.
conspiracy theorist trying to inference that the sun affects climate on Earth? I mean, because I mean, 10 years ago we were told that was conspiracy theory to think that the sun has some sort of effect on climate here on Earth.
Oh yeah, it's like the biggest climate effect. Like actually, there's guys like Tim Ball that I talked to in great detail. We interviewed Tim Ball as well, but he says that maybe we should consider the solar spot activity and the temperature differences that have happened throughout history. And sure enough,
sounds like a white supremacist to me with those ideas.
But then like, back to that, we're really starting to understand how space weather, like actually sun, wind, solar wind, and solar storm, all this stuff, how it actually affects the magnetosphere in the Earth, and how it trickles down, and of course the protons and ions getting shoved from the sun interfere and creates they believe that they are creating storms when the solar storms are active and so on. So there's a lot of things that these guys at the UN seems to completely not even think about, that the sun would have anything to do with what happens here on planet Earth. But I think it has a lot to do. You gotta remember, it's a big blowing boulder, and now I have a weather station too, and that a big blowing bowl up there that it actually warmed. The highest I saw it this year was 1,048 watts per square meter. So you're telling me that a thing that could warm up that much within just a 1 square meter would have nothing to do with cooling or warming at all? I don't know. I think it might have something, but I was going to say, look up Suspicious Observer, I think it's called. He just recently put out the mini documentary on the potential for cooling, actually, because there's been always like a constant worry about cooling, warming, and of course the government has used that to their advantage to try to tax people over time, and use the climate, that the sun is changing, to then fearmonger to that, oh yeah, it's all you human beings, therefore you need to pay mass amounts of taxes to save the world, and give all these unelected people at the United Nations all this money so they could make sure that we don't have to worry, so we could just lower the amount of increase in temperature that we will have. So it's just awful, Tim. And again, it all comes back to this whole thing that government creates over time, is that they believe that humans are so great and so fantastic and gods on this earth that they could do anything that they want, and we could also change the weather pretty drastically, even though that what we got to understand, we change it in certain ways. We could actually, it was Bill Gates that was talking about geoengineering the skies now. I don't know if you heard about that. But again, these guys, they think that we're stupid and that we're willing to just jump on any idea. I just highly suggest to go and look at all the different evidence out there. I looked at I looked at all the global warming stuff. I looked at all the con global warming stuff, and then it just tells me, like, from what I've looked and I looked on hundreds of these documentaries, what I found is interesting is, like, the climate changes, and it changes go forth and back over hundreds and thousands and 100,000s of years. And unfortunately, I think it's very little that we could do about that. But there's something that we could do something about, that Greta Thunberg should actually look more into, and it's all the pollution and all the devastation of nature that we see in the world that is happening by corporations and that are funded by banksters and by the government and the military. How much they destroy societies. Look at what in Vietnam, Agent Orange there, the birth deficiencies there, the depleted uranium in the Middle East, all this stuff that the government has put forward is highly toxic. And
or you had talked about Monsanto
that they used, and you see, like, of course, not to mention the atom bombs that they blew up over Hiroshima and Nagasaki and all the birth defects there, but also on the Bikini Islands and the Marshall Islands, how much they've destroyed people.
Or
The
about
government has destroyed and murdered and killed.
Crops and the
and the DDT before that. Yeah, it's just an unending array of.
Or eventually, an
things.
asteroid is going to wipe everything out, and unless we come together, if there's one thing to come together against, maybe it's trying to prevent asteroids from wiping us out or getting off the planet.
I know there's ideas out there. Let at least maybe that's something that we should focus more on, is how to protect ourselves from.
But I do have to get going soon. But I did put up on screen. There was an article from 7 years ago where it says U.S. geoengineers to spray sun-reflecting chemicals from balloon, and it goes on to say Keith, who manages a multi-billion-dollar geoengineering research fund provided by Microsoft founder Bill Gates, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And so then David Keith is also one of the guys in the movie. I believe it's called What in the World Are They Spraying? There's another one called Why in the World Are They Spraying? Awesome documentary. And this guy is in there, and David Keith, where someone taped him, and he says, we haven't really studied the effects of putting in aluminum, barium, strontium. And then here's an even better one. This is John Brennan. For you to know, this is him as a CIA director at a Council on Foreign Relations, which we had already mentioned them earlier. I think this is the part where it talks about it. If not, it's an hour long, so I'll need to go check it out. I'll need to go find it. But anyway, this will be the last thing I'll leave you guys with today.
Another example.
I think we kind of covered a wide array of things today.
Well, hold on. I do have the video of John Brennan pulled up right now where he admits it.
Engineering that potentially could help reverse the warming effects of global climate change. One that has gained my personal attention is stratospheric aerosol injection, or SAI, a method of seeding the stratosphere with particles that can help reflect the sun's heat in much the same way that volcanic eruptions do. An SAI program could limit global temperature increases.
Anyways, it goes on and on from there, but I do have to get going, and definitely appreciate everyone that was, on the stream today. Appreciate John coming out here as well. We wish Josh safe travels while he's in Turkey. And definitely thank you for checking us out. We'll be doing more live streams. There is stuff that doesn't make it on the channel. So if you want to head to the Libertyadvisorshow.com, you can see all the places to follow me, whether it's, my own YouTube channel, which I wouldn't really recommend. I'd rather do BitChute, Instagram, all different places. And
just one last thing. I saw somebody was asking us if we were in for an October surprise and a banking collapse in October or a market collapse. I don't know. Maybe.
Usually October surprise is a phrase that deals directly with an election, because elections are in November, so it would be next year would be the October surprise or whatever. I had a meme that said October surprise, and it was BITCH, and it was a picture of Julian Assange releasing something, and then I think I had Hillary on the other side. But I do have to get going. I've got to pick up my kids, but definitely appreciate everyone watching today, sticking around. Hopefully the audio, and every time we're trying to improve a little bit. I do have a link below for my free ebook as well, and then we'll also periodically every now. I probably only done it twice. Send out text messages like, "Hey, we're going live," because eventually, guess what? You're not gonna be able to find John, Josh, myself here on YouTube, because we're gonna be taken down just like everybody else that isn't a communist. But anyways, on that happy note, thank you for watching us, Picciott and John Sneisen with World Alternative Media. Find the truth.
Be the change.